Baz, come on, Terry.
Come on, guys, let's get out of the house and just get on that horse and ride it around, Sadie.
Butterscotch Shenanigans.
Hey everybody, welcome to Coffee with Butterscotch. This is episode 38, and this is the game dev comedy podcast of Butterscotch Shenanigans. I'm Seth, and I'm the games programmer.
I'm Adam, and I'm the webs programmer.
And I'm Sam, and I make the art programs.
And today is February 9th,
yeah,
2016. So what's happened? Oh wait, we also have a warning. I forgot about that. Yeah. Don't listen to this podcast if you're sensitive or if you're a child. All right. So what's happening this week, you guys?
Nothing.
Nothing.
I mean, there must be something happening. A whole bunch of things were happening.
I think a bunch of things happened, and now we're sort of in the routine grind again.
Yeah,
that's
so
true.
The aftermath.
One thing that happened that we didn't get to put into our own role of happenings was the St. Louis Global Game Jam, which, for those who don't know, the Global Game Jam is a worldwide 48-hour global game jam event where you get a theme on Friday and everybody has the same theme across the entire planet.
But is this game jam a game jam?
It is
It's
in
a little
sense.
unclear. Okay.
In a sense.
And by Sunday, you have to make a game based on that theme. So we all kind of got our chops in the game jam format, and so we're big fans of it. And we love doing the Global Game Jam because it's just a big, crazy event here in St. Louis. And this year, this is really cool. St. Louis is actually the third largest site in the country, in the U.S., with I think like 253 people or something nuts. They apparently couldn't fit everybody in the auditorium afterwards for the showing of all these things, and it's like a 300-person auditorium, so a bunch of extra people came to watch. And interestingly, it was actually the most gameful U.S. city in that it produced 53 games. So more games were made in St. Louis over the Global Game Jam in the U.S. than any other site in the U.S., which is pretty nuts.
Yeah, and this is because people in St. Louis are adopting the idea of smaller teams are better. So this puts the average team size at around like 4 to 5 people, which even, like, in my opinion, even then, that's still a big team for a jam game.
Yeah.
But compared to previous years, sometimes you'd see teams that had 12, 15 people on them. So, yeah. So, for the last couple of years, we would have still, about 200 to 220 people at the Global Game Jam, but only about 25 games would come out of it.
Yeah.
And so we've more than doubled our game creation rate, which is awesome. Unfortunately, we couldn't go to the game jam because we had our first possibility of having a weekend in like 2.5 months.
Yeah. So we had to take it.
It was too seductive.
Yeah.
I just slept mostly.
I don't even remember. Was this just last weekend? Like a
2
few
weekends
days
ago.
2 weekends ago. Okay.
Yeah. So,
What did I even do? I don't remember.
normally we are all over these game jams because we freaking love them. But at a certain point, we just, our whole minds and bodies broke into splinters and we couldn't do it anymore.
Yeah.
But, we'll be at the next one.
Yeah.
When is the next one?
There'll probably be one. There's usually one in the fall as well.
So every 6 months kind of a deal?
Yeah, so there'll be one more in St. Louis. And that one actually is usually about half the size of the Global Game Jam one. So it's pretty neat. There's a lot of people there who sharpen their knives.
The Global Jam is yearly.
Yep.
Correct.
Okay. And then St. Louis has, what's the other jam? Is it a St. Louis
It's
Scatter
usually,
Jam and stuff?
it's either the Scatter Jam or just the St. Louis Game Jam. So
Yeah. So I'd recommend if you are sort of like within
the tri-state area.
Yeah, if you're
whatever that
within
means.
a driving distance of say like 4 hours of St. Louis, I would recommend coming to a St. Louis game jam, and we'll have announcements on those in the future in the podcast. But my first experience with sort of group game dev was I drove 5 hours. I drove from Iowa City down to St. Louis, and that's actually what sort of got me really entrenched into game dev. So if you're interested in game dev, do a game jam. And in fact, come to the St. Louis game jam.
They're the best.
Maybe we'll see you there. Otherwise, we've been working on Crashlands stuff. We've been working on the quality of life patch. Already got a few sort of cool little features put in. One in particular I think is pretty interesting, which is colorblind mode. So in order for this to happen, I had to sort of do a little bit of research on color blindness and sort of what it means, because I think like you guys could probably back me up on this, but like we've all heard about like the idea of, like red, green colorblind or, whatever. But it's really hard to understand like what that means.
Yeah.
Because if you can see red and green and blue, you can't recognize what it would mean to not be able to see those things, right? And it's not the same as seeing black and white. It's the inability to distinguish between those two colors. And so everything just takes on a completely different look. And this is a particular problem in games because as game designers, we use color to convey a lot of things. It's like a traffic signal, right? Like red is stop and green is go. Well, if you can't tell the difference, that's a problem. And in Crashlands, this is a big deal because the enemies put these little, circles or telegraphs on the ground so that you can tell where to not be standing when damage is about to hit you. But if you have like a red-green color blindness and it's a red circle on a green ground, then suddenly it's practically invisible to you. Mm-hmm. So in order to sort of work around this, I managed to find some cool sort of like filters, basically, like it is in summary, that I could lay on top of the game that would change the way the game looked so that I could sort of experience what Crashlands looks like for a person with these various types of color blindness. And that allowed me to modify the colors of things in the game to accommodate that. So that if I could see those things with this filter on, then a person with that type of color blindness should also be able to see those things.
Cool.
So that was, I have to say, it was a very eye-opening experience. I've never experienced anything the way that a colorblind person experiences it until Friday of this past week. And, I actually am kind of upset at myself for, like, before we launched Crashlands, we got a couple requests from people saying, hey, is this game going to have colorblind options? And I think, we were all kind of like in the rush trying to get it out the door. And we were just like, no, like we'll just add it afterwards, But after playing the game from the perspective of a person with color blindness, just like, holy crap, I don't know. Like I'm going to make it a point now to make sure that is
in. Yeah, it's a good practice to
be more inclusive.
Yeah, it's to include as many people as possible. And
it took way less time than I thought it would. And
how many things did you have to change to make it work?
It was really just a handful of things, because the things that are most important are things that require, fast reaction based on color, like in combat, right?
Yeah.
Most other things are pretty easy to manage and pretty easily distinguishable. But if you're in the heat of battle and you can't tell what's about to kill you or whether it's about to heal you, right? Then that's really bad.
That's a problem.
Yeah. So those are kind of the core things. And so what we're going to do is, when we do the quality of life patch, we'll actually put it in the unstable channel and the beta channels and, Steam and Google Play and stuff like that. Put it into test flight so we can get some feedback from people with color blindness on how those modes are doing and if it's doing the job well, if there's anything else that's, unclear. But yeah, that was just a really eye-opening experience for me.
Yeah, so and I don't know if the two of you even knew about this, but because I can't remember where it came through our contact form, and I might have taken care of it before you guys saw it. But there was somebody who wrote in who was thankful that we had made Crashlands playable with the single input, because he's disabled, and that was the only way he could interact with the game. And so he was super pumped about that. But then at the same time, he was then maybe even more down than he otherwise would have been, because this game was working the way that we intended. But he went to go do the perk stuff in our other games. And our other games are absolutely not playable.
Right.
They mostly require two hands.
Yeah, they require two hands to do.
Yeah.
And it was just one of those things that, like, we designed a control scheme for the game we were making without even considering at all the fact that, like, some people have one hand or not enough fingers or paralyzed or whatever. Like, all these kinds of things that could affect a person's ability to interact with a control scheme.
Right.
Just didn't even think about that fact. Which just goes to show that, we're privileged as fuck to not have to have thought about that.
Right.
But I think it's an important thing that we need to do from here on out. And maybe if we, can take the opportunity every once in a while to look back at our old games and come up with clever ways to make them more, disabled friendly.
Just some accessibility options.
Yeah, accessibility options, right? Because it is definitely the case that it's hard to come up with a control scheme that would work as well as the ones we have in those previous games, but that's assuming that the person who's using it actually has two hands. Because if they don't, it doesn't work at all.
Correct.
And so there must be some other ones we could come up with that will still do the job for other kinds of situations. So anyway, it's kind of now that enough people are playing our games that what used to be so few people that we never even heard from them now is actually enough people that we get to hear from them and realize what we're doing wrong and need to do a better job about. So,
but we do appreciate the input because we just don't have perspective.
We need
other people to provide that for us.
Yeah, so, absolutely.
Yeah. And then otherwise we're working on the just getting started on the Crashlands creator. So,
well, not exactly just getting started.
Well, just getting started on making it accessible to humans.
Yeah, probably the best way to put it is that the creator is actually done. What we're working on is a light redo of the UI structure for it. We're not super interested in doing a complete overhaul, even though that, if we were actually putting this as like a piece of software, like real software, we'd probably do a complete overhaul. But since it's kind of an accessory to the game itself, it'll be basically the way it was when we used it to create the entire game, with a few additional sort of buttons and things to make life easier. And what we're going to do, speaking of colors of various sorts, is actually go with a sort of blueprint theme for it. So it basically looks like a blueprint. So it just use blue and white and a couple other colors like that, to give this idea of, you're essentially scaffolding out an entire world while you're playing this thing. So there's actually not much to do on just the generic stylings of the thing. The biggest project is actually going to be not in that, but in the documentation and the tutorials and stuff we're going to build for it. Because we really want it to be the case that if you say, oh, I really like Crashlands, I want to build something like this creator is not a light tool. This is literally like handing over the keys to an F-15. Like it's
very complicated.
Yeah. So it's easy enough to understand once you know how the pieces fit together.
Wait, does an F-15 have keys?
I'm sure it does, man.
Okay.
I'm sure it does.
Okay.
I wonder what those keys look like. I don't know. But I mean, it's the case that with this particular piece of software that, you're going to have, it has a learning curve to it. And so the biggest part of, I think, what we'll be focusing on with the creator is less on the visual sexiness of the thing and more on the learnability of it. Which of course part of that is baked into the visual accessibility, but, it's in a good enough point right now where I think we're going to be spending a lot more time on that documentation and the learning materials than on the actual, polish of that thing itself. So.
Damn right.
And that thing will be in alpha indefinitely.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
It'll never be, we'll never say that it's a release version. It'll be a thing that we provided for the community and for people's amusement so that they can do cool stuff. But it won't be a thing that we'll provide lots of support for and all that.
Yeah. I mean, it's essentially a game engine in all actuality. It just happens to be that Crashlands is the sort of, baseline pieces for it, which is a little weird and interesting.
Yeah. So we'll have more info on that in the coming weeks as things go. And also as we get closer to the creator patch and out of the quality of life patch, we're going to be calling on a lot of our players to help us test the creator, both for, usability and for bugs and stuff like that.
Yeah, and the plan is basically the moment that we think the thing is secure and has all the functions that we intend that it will have, which really isn't very too far in the future. Basically, the moment that happens, I'll start setting up the system to enroll beta testers. Because we want people in really early to give it a lot of time. It's a big thing. It takes a lot of time to build a story in this thing.
It took 3.5 months or so to build the Crashlands story. With two people.
But we don't, and we also were working super fast and working full time, right? But on the other hand, most people who are making stuff for the creator are going to be making much, much smaller things than that.
It's down to the point now where we could, Adam and I both can add, probably an hour-long quest chain in about 20 minutes. At this point, if there's not a lot of, if there's not additional artwork to create and such. So it's the sort of thing that once you learn how to do it, you can actually generate a ton of content, pretty rapidly. So it'll be really interesting to see what everybody else does.
It's just a lot of trial and error.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So we'll have more info on that as time passes. All right. So otherwise, that's all the news we have. And now it's time for the segment of the podcast called here's some games we're playing. Let's talk about that. The only game we've actually been playing is our Mellow. Mm-hmm. So we all picked it up. There was a Steam sale this past week on our Mellow. It's a game by League of Geeks, and it's their first and I believe currently only game. Mm-hmm. They kickstarted it. They raised a few $100,000 to put this thing together. We don't know anything about League of Geeks, and all we could find was that they appear to be 4 dudes from Australia or something.
That's our best guess.
We saw a picture of them, and that was all the information that they made available. So, so that's our guess. But our Mellow it's a turn-based strategy game. It's very much has a tabletop game kind of a feel, complete with dice and everything. It's played on a hex grid, and it's sort of like a blend of, I guess, it's like got a little bit of RPG character elements, some strategy. There's cards. So we'll talk a little bit about that. Yeah, it's currently on PC, Mac, and Linux, possibly coming to tablets.
I think it's on PlayStation also.
Is it?
Yeah. Oh, yes.
I want to say, yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, their website, the website for Mellow is, I mean, to me, this whole Web 2.0 thing is now just a joke, because what it seems to mean is have infinite white space and like really pretty appearance, but provide absolutely no context or information anywhere.
So they really embrace that?
Yeah, they really embrace, like, the website looks fucking beautiful, but if you want to actually learn something, it's basically impossible. But I swear I saw a PlayStation reference somewhere. So I think it's probably on PlayStation.
Okay, yeah, I think I remember reading something. If it's not on PlayStation yet, it will be, probably. And it came out in early access last January, so January 2015. The full version released in September 2015. It has a 76 Metascore, which we can talk about that, but Metascores are not indicative of much. Considering it also got a 5.6 from IGN.
That blows my goddamn mind.
Yeah.
Okay.
Which, as we all know, on a 10-point scale, a 5 is about as worse as it gets. Or as bad as it gets.
Let's just dive into this thing then.
I also want to say though, 88% recommendation rate from Steam players.
Yeah.
So
hit it. Here's my thoughts. So part of the reason we all wanted to play the same game this week is so we could actually have a spirited discussion about it rather than each of us talking about the 3 other, games we played. So, in that light, I think getting something like a 5.6 from IGN just makes me wonder what in the hell IGN is doing over there. Because first of all, the overall production value of this thing is ridiculously good. Like, ridiculous. Yeah, juicy. Like, these guys nail the polish and the juice so well. So it's a smooth game to play. It's really fun, and it's just damn gorgeous. Like, it's a fun world to be in and inhabit. From an actual gameplay standpoint, I thought the game itself was really, really fun. It's basically, you're on a hex grid. It's you versus 3 other opponents who are either AI or multiplayer, and you each start in a corner of this hex grid, and via essentially 4 different series of objectives, you try to win the game before your enemies do, and that's it. And you do that by moving around the map, capturing towns,
casting
defeating
spells,
people, casting spells,
traps,
all sorts of fun stuff like that. And it has enough different methods for winning in it, like varieties of strategies, that my first couple gameplays I was kind of confused as to which one I should be doing, I guess.
I still am.
It's complex. There's a
lot going on.
Well, it's not even that it's complex. It's that the game is... The consequences of your actions are randomized enough by other shit that's happening on the board that, I enjoyed the game. Like, I had a lot of fun playing it, but it's one of those games that I felt like I had literally no control over at all.
Yeah, so that's essentially what my one beef with the mechanics of the whole thing was that while you can go into it with a strategy that you would prefer to do, and you can choose a few items that your character is sort of equipped with to help in whatever that strategy is, before the game starts, you don't really have control over which strategy is best for you to use. And that's because of the randomization of stuff on the map. So, for example, you complete quests in this game, and quests give your character permanent boosts to like health and damage, that sort of thing, which allow you, of course, to do better in battle and other things. The problem is that if you say, I'm going to pursue quests, it's like, that's my main way I'm going to win the game. quests can oftentimes and will oftentimes, as in fact probably 50% of the time, because of how the map is structured, spawn on the opposite side of the map from where you spawn.
So it takes forever to get over there. The chances of you getting there intact are not great.
Right. And then the exact same thing happens with what they call a spirit stone. So one of the ways to win is by collecting these 4 spirit stones from around the map. And the same issue presents itself there, which is that they randomly spawn in stone circles as well as can be randomly gotten from dungeons. But it's random enough that it's the same sort of issue where you can...
Well, it's not random enough. It's just completely random.
Right.
Like, it's just totally random.
And so, as a result, you can actually have a really strong early game of collecting these spirit stones and get like 2 of them, really quickly. And then the next one will spawn on the other side of the map, and you try to get there and die, and you can't do it, try to get there and die. And by that time, like someone else happened to acquire like 3 of them, and now you're like, well, I guess I'll throw that strategy in the trash and move on. So it was interesting to me because from a gameplay perspective, there wasn't much. It didn't ever feel like I was able to actually establish momentum. Yeah. In whatever strategy I was pursuing. What I had to do is remain flexible the entire time.
Yeah. So speaking of momentum, so I actually played an online match. So I played, I think, 3 or 4 single player matches to kind of figure out how the game worked. And then I was like, I'm going to jump into a multiplayer match. And that's exactly what happened to me in the multiplayer match. It actually happened to everybody, where each player over the course of like the first half of the match had clearly sort of like tried to pick a strategy that they were going to use to win. And it didn't work for anybody, actually, because the game concluded by one player who was at the very bottom. So there's 4 different ways to win. And one player who wasn't pursuing any of those, and was actually just getting beaten up by everybody the whole time. On the very last turn, walked into the palace and fought the king, and just by luck of the dice, because that's how the battles are fought, just by the luck of the dice, managed to kill the king and survive with 1 hit point. And that person won the game. Even though the position of lead was bouncing around between the other 3 of us throughout the game. I think it changed hands like 4 different times. And my personal issue was my first like 6 or 7 battles that I fought, I just rolled terribly with my dice. Like I actually had more dice than my opponents did, but most of my dice ended up being misses, just garbage. And I just got my ass kicked repeatedly. And then finally I completed my first quest. Then my next quest was at the exact furthest position on the board from my spawn point. And I spent the last half of the game just trying to get across the board. And, and like the closest I got was 1 square away. And at that point I got hit by a spell from somebody and just one shot and killed him. And I reappeared back on the opposite end. So it really, is very random.
Yeah. I want to bring up in the most recent patch, it said they addressed some pacing issues, which I'm not so sure what those were, but my guess is that the game was even less tuned now than, of course, like 6 months or a year ago when it actually came out for the first time. For less tuned for this sort of enjoyable play, I guess. But one interesting tweak I think that perhaps they should consider with regards to the quest structure. So those quests they just randomly spawn anywhere on the map. It appears, given what we've all seen from it. And the easiest thing to do is actually, like, if they built in a distance loop structure to that. So the first quest you got would only spawn, say, a max of like 5 tiles away from your starting point. The next one, a max of like 7, and then, etc. So that as you're completing more and more of these quests, which of course is making you more powerful, you're actually able to...
You're venturing further out.
Right. And you're also, every time you complete a quest, you get, your character actually improves. And so the ability of you to, say, go across the entire map, you're going to be actually able to do that like around the time that the end of the game comes. And so if you happen to randomly get a quest right now that puts your second quest, for example, on the other side of the map, you just kind of have to, not do it, which isn't particularly enjoyable.
I don't know. For me, like, I don't know. I ended up kind of treating it as a PvE kind of game. Mm-hmm. So my wife and I played a bunch of rounds of it. The first round that we played, I was trying to do a quest-based thing, so I was like trying to get to each quest location as Sam was describing. It's always infinitely far away, and it also just so happened that I failed every quest that I had. I mean, it's just random, right? So I failed every single. So I was just.
You never took the save option?
No, I never took the save option. And so each time I did it, I lost. So and when you lose, something bad happens to you, and you don't get the thing you were trying to get. And so just over and over again, I was not only not progressing, but moving backwards, while everybody else in the game, which was just my wife and the AIs, were doing better and better. But even still, I managed a last-minute coup, and suddenly, via a few sort of lucky situations, managed to I killed one of the bad guy things, I killed a player, I killed a Kingsguard, all of which give you influence, and got a few towns under my control, all of a sudden had tons of magic, got a few good spell cards, everything just kind of all of a sudden lined up really nicely in a row, culminating in letting me just enter the castle and kill the king. So I was losing for literally the entirety of the game, and then all of a sudden got to win. So one of the cool things that the ridiculous amount of randomness does is it makes it so that, you can't get momentum. It's impossible. Because at any moment, and I mean, some of the cards that can be played against you have really severe impacts. Like one of the ones that I played against one of the AIs, who at that time was ahead in influence by 8 or something. So they were way, way out in the lead. And I had a card that would knock their influence down by 1 every single turn until they died.
Jeez.
Right? Yeah.
So this character had to go, and also when you die, you lose an influence as well.
Yeah.
So
that they just have all these different mechanisms in place.
And of course, they can't actually kill themselves because of how random the game is.
Yeah, you can't lose on purpose either, right? So to me that was actually interesting because it makes it, if you're the kind of person who just feels like you have to win stuff, this is not a good game for you. If you're the kind of person who just enjoys the experience of of constantly, because it's not that you don't get to make a plan, it's that your plan always gets shat on, right? And you have
to try to adjust.
Yeah,
you can't adjust on purpose.
Exactly. So it's all about adaptation. Is you figure out where you are, you see what's happened, figure out where the other players are, where the bad guys have spawned. There's all this kind of stuff that's happening all the time. Sure. Every single one of those things throws a wrench in your plan, and so now you make a new plan.
But I guess here's my disagreement with you on that, because the one interesting thing I noted about after I was finished playing a few rounds of Mellow was that I had no urge to play another round of Mellow, at all. Once I sort of got the idea of what the game did and played it a few enough times to actually, win a game or two. And I think part of the reason for that was
it's not a single player game.
Well, that's part of it. But the other reason is that I had zero sense of capable growth coming from playing the game. Because
when I won, I didn't feel like I won. I just felt like I randomly happened to be the person who.
Right, and I think that's what I'm saying. Though, I think a lot of games have actually tried to aim for this. So we've talked about this before. The Heroes of the Storm actually performs a similar sort of weird thing, where what they wanted to do with the MOBA was make it so that at any point your team could come back and win, which is essentially the same thing that's happening here in Armello. The problem is what that does is it in my mind, and what happened to me while playing Armello and while playing Heroes of the Storm, is that it stripped enough agency from me that it didn't make it feel like playing the game would give me any sort of skills or anything like that to make it so that as I played the game more, that I'd be better at playing the game. I felt like I would just be literally rolling a dice more every single time I played.
Well, I think they really just took a really big page out of the tabletop board game book, right? Yeah. I mean, it's just everything is sort of contingent on what cards you draw, what dice you roll. And then what you get to do is basically decide where your character is on the board, but what happens to your character and then the outcomes of those events are just left completely to chance.
Yeah, but then you get to choose how risky you want to take things, and the fact was that every single one of those quests that I had, there is a safe option that I could have chosen, right?
Yeah, but so here's the crazy thing, though. Yeah, so here's the crazy thing is that after I played a few times, I in the beginning I only chose the risky ones because I was like, whatever, I need rewards. Actually, toward the end, I only chose the safe ones. I never once towards the end, unless I had a 90% plus chance, would choose the really the risky option. I
started only doing risky things. Actually, I did exactly the opposite. As I realized more and more that.
Oh, you mean because it's totally random? So
because it's totally random, yeah. Well, but the fact is, though, yeah, and it makes it more interesting on the one hand, right? But the fact was that because I used to, in my first few games, I completely avoided stuff like traps and the cave things, whatever you call those, the ruins,
the dungeons,
the dungeons. I completely avoided those things. I didn't want anything bad to happen. But every time something bad happens, it provides random opportunities for good stuff, right? And you can often move forward a little faster than you move back, even when bad stuff happens. And so for me, actually, like doing the risky stuff was fun. But I do want to say, like, I think we're kind of all in agreement about what this game is like. And to me, it's a tabletop game. And it is, like, I'm pretty sure you could convert this, like, straight to a tabletop game, and it would look less awesome, obviously, but it would be exactly the same.
Yeah, it would also be much more complicated to manage.
Yeah,
because there's a lot of dice.
Yeah,
there's a lot of dice.
Because my wife and I play board games together all the time, and the thing that I love about board games that do this is that it allows you to do it purely as a social exercise. I don't see it as like competing or anything like that. It's a social exercise because what those games allow you to do is play with anybody. It doesn't matter. And it doesn't matter like how much you've played the game versus a total noob that comes in, right? Everybody gets to have crushed. Because you can still get crushed or still win, and so everybody gets to kind of come in and have the same experience. Yeah,
but here's the downside though. In online play, they don't let you chat with people.
Yeah, I would.
No. It's like Hearthstone. There's predefined things your character can say on your behalf, but you can't type anything.
Yeah, right. I mean that's like the reason I really enjoy. Like I actually really like this game. But I really like it in the way that I can sit down with my wife or with people I know, people I'm friends with, or Sam and Seth or whatever. I could sit down in real life with laptops or over VoIP or whatever and just chat about shit and like have a good social time.
It's not an intense game that takes a lot of skill and attention.
Well, in fact,
it's not Rocket League.
No, and there's like timers and stuff, but I would turn all of those off and just play it. Yeah, and just play it like a board game. Purely for a social. Yeah. So I think we're probably all kind of on the same page about what the game feels like. Which is that it doesn't feel like something you could get good at. I wonder though if you played it enough.
I think there's got to be some. There's probably some
strategies. Yeah, because I think it's with anything that has a lot of randomness, but because there are things like as you win and stuff, you unlock these trinkets that you can start the game with that will like give you a few bonus things. And so, for example, you can choose, and you have character classes that have different advantages over each other. But then you can modify that advantage further with these things you unlock. And so, for example, after a few rounds, I unlocked a thing that let me increase my wisdom by 1, which actually lets me draw 1 extra card every time. Right? Which is, even though everything else is very random, that's a major advantage because it gives me a 33% increase in likelihood of getting something interesting for the entire game. Right? So I think there's probably some things like that, and then also what character you choose and what strategies you go by, that while it's still random, so any given moment you'll have no idea if it's going to work out. In the sort of like the long view, sort of just like gambling, right? In the long view, you can tweak your probabilities to end up on top.
Right.
Well, I mean, to me, it's kind of like Monopoly, where I did a bunch of research on sort of like what spaces get landed on the most on average in Monopoly. And sort of like which spaces give the best bang for your buck.
Did you do a simulation to do this, or how did you do it?
Other people have already done those.
Yeah, I figured somebody
So I just looked into all this stuff, and so for example, it turns out that I believe it's Atlantic Avenue is the most landed on space, and the most landed on group of spaces is the 3 orange ones. And in both cases, those are on the like expensive end of the board, right? So there's like 2 sets of properties per side of the board. And those are the higher end ones. So your bang for your buck with houses and hotels is better on those. So if you just like go after the orange and the yellows, then you're going to win way more often than not. And so, yeah, I mean, there's always dominant strategies that'll pop up like that. But
right. I think as far as like 2 things, or I guess, as far as one thing that I think, so seeing the game for what it is, which is very genuinely a board game, as Adam's pointed out. I would give it, I mean, basically straight up just high marks across the board because
it's great.
It's extremely good. I think,
fun.
I think if you're coming into it looking at it as if it's supposed to be something else, you're going to have a really hard time. One of which is,
that's always true though.
It is true, but I think there's an exceptional danger with this particular game. And I think it's probably, I didn't read the IGN review. I didn't realize it gotten that low of a score, but my guess is going to be that they pegged it as something that it wasn't and then blamed it for not being that thing. Which is what these reviewers tend to often do.
Which is about to happen to us from Destructoid.
Yep, that one's coming down the pipe at some point. And so
they're pretty mad that Crashlands is not Don't Starve.
Yeah.
They're going to be real upset about that.
But so it's interesting to look at it because the one thing that I really honestly wish was in this game. I looked at the updates that are coming up, and they clearly have no plans for it. But the world that they made is so cool and gorgeous.
Yeah.
All I really wanted a single player campaign.
Well, and they clearly could do it because they basically
do it with the tutorial. Yeah, absolutely. And so, and it would require them to be more flexible with the board layout, essentially, at the end of the day. But I think like that would be the thing that would turn this from being like a really fun game into, to me, like an actual game that I would keep playing.
Yeah, because then it comes with a story. Because actually, I
characters
really
and everything's so cool.
Yeah, I love the tutorial. Like, even though
it's so cool.
It introduces concepts very slowly. Like, it actually kind of does what Crashlands does, right? Which is uses story to teach the game, but never makes you feel like there's stuff you don't know yet. Mm-hmm. You just keep on learning new stuff until at the end, like, now you know all the parts of the game. And while you're playing it, of course, like, I was confused the whole time I was playing the tutorial because I was like, I don't actually know how to do anything yet. But it was done in a well enough way that I just felt like I was playing through a story.
Right.
So yeah, it was well done. They clearly have the capability to do it. I think
but that's actually what I was confused by though from watching the trailers and stuff.
Yeah.
I was genuinely confused after I did the tutorial and played a single player game because I thought single player meant like campaign in a sense.
No, it's just you versus AIs.
Yeah, and like the same sort of 40-minute match every time. So I was actually I don't know if that was like a marketing thing on their front. Because I mean, I looked into the game a while ago and then did not buy it when it first came out. I remember it coming out, being super impressed with the graphics and watching the trailers, being like, "Whoa, this looks really neat." So their trailers and stuff really sort of lean on the story, or I guess the world that they've created. But in the end, the aspect that you get of that is just in the text-based stuff and the interfacing of the multiplayer stuff. So there's not actually any campaign built into the game, which I think is a bit of a...
Well, I have to say, one thing that I think would work really well with this game. So Sam, you're talking about sort of the lack of meta level loop.
Yeah.
Where, if you win a game, like, yeah, maybe you'll unlock a new ring or something that you can equip on your character to change something, but your character never just like gets better, right?
Correct.
It just gets different. But one thing that actually I think would work with our Mellow that they did not do on the meta level is deck building.
Yeah, either deck building, or if you want to take an actual competitive approach as well, like as from the Hearthstone side, if you just do something essentially akin to the League of Legends talent tree system, right, for matchmaking purposes, and that way people can specialize a little bit with their cards, or get little bonus extra skills that they can always have on their characters. And I think it doesn't quite have enough meta level content.
And deck building would allow you to actually create a strategy because, for example, one thing that drove me crazy was like I was playing a character where I was trying to avoid getting rot. Like, because the way that the rot system works is basically like it's a thing that gets stuck to your character, and suddenly you're like, if you have not very much of it, it puts you at almost a complete disadvantage in every aspect of the game. So the only way to sort of overcome that is to just cover yourself with it. Like you have to go all the way with it and get tons of rot, and then all of a sudden you become really overpowered, while also constantly dying slowly. So I was like, man, because I kept occasionally I would just draw like 2 cards that gave my character rot, and that's not what I was trying to do. Like, I'm like, oh, I want swords, like I want some equipment or whatever.
Right.
And it turns out I was just like forced into this particular play style. And I think that if you had a deck building aspect where you could choose a suite of cards to bring to the table, then all of a sudden that would change.
Yeah, no, that's everything. A great point. Yeah, is there? So I know you can look at your cards. I didn't actually. Did we miss something? Can you build it?
Maybe. I mean, if it's in there, that would be great.
I don't think so. They show you. Yeah, they have that thing on like the main menu of the game where you can look at all the cards that you have seen. But I don't think that's actually a deck building aspect.
Okay, yeah. The reason I ask is because we found out. I think it was last week after talking about Sunless Sea and about how we both enjoyed a lot more if we could just not die and start over completely.
Oh, no, it's still...
I just want to point out, we found out that there's a merciful mode in that where it just turns off the permadeath.
No, it does not. No, that's not what
there's
it does.
not?
No. It doesn't turn off permadeath. It lets you save at any time. It doesn't autosave. Because the normal one autosaves on death and every time you go to a port. So then once you die, you're dead because they saved you being dead, right? Merciful mode, basically, it doesn't actually turn off death. It just lets you then
save around
clever
it,
about your
basically.
saving. Yeah, you can basically quick save and get out of it. So to me, then as a consequence, it still
Doesn't quite work.
No, I mean, it doesn't actually fix any of the problems that I had with that game. My wife actually played a bunch of it last weekend and also like really liked it and played a few hours of it. But then by that time, she was just like, "This is just moving too slowly." You know, like it's just
because you keep
moves too
dying
slowly. Well, she wasn't even dying. It was like,
are you talking about the boat itself?
Yeah, the boat moves too fucking slowly. So. Because she was finally getting into the story. Like, and one of the stories in particular that I experienced was this crazy thing where you go to this island and there's these like rats versus these guinea pigs, and you get to help them orchestrate which one of them wins this like epic gory battle. I mean, it's all in text, right? But it's really well written and very fun. And so, like, I helped one of them out, and then and there was some treachery involved, and then there's sort of there's a randomness component, and so all these awesome things happened, and then half an hour later, I had no more fuel, and just I was done with the game. Like, that was the end of it. And now I know that cool storyline exists, but in order to get the interesting stuff from it, I would have to go literally play that thing again.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And the fun thing about it was how like surprising and interesting and exciting it was. And now basically all of a sudden, every time you play the game, it necessarily gets less exciting because you see more and more stuff you've already seen. And there's no way around.
Shit.
I know. I actually became, after Sam said that, he was like, "Hey, you don't have to have permadeath." And I was like, "Fuck yeah, I'll go back and do it." And now I'm even more distraught than I was the last time I played it.
My bad.
Well, let's not dwell on it too long. Let's hit some questions.
Yeah,
we got
from players.
tons of questions. Everybody's asking questions.
Yeah, so we got a whole bunch of questions. These questions come from podcast.bscotch.net. And these are asked by mostly Bscotch ID members with the occasional anonymous Joe or Jane squeezed into the mix. So our first question comes from Anti-Spleen with 18 upvotes. The question is, has the Bscotch ID helped with piracy rates? What else are you doing to combat piracy? Numbers? Can you share some numbers?
Numbers?
He had like 2 exclamation points sandwiching a question mark.
Wow.
Which I assume is pronounced that way.
Yeah, I think that's pretty accurate.
Yeah, so what are the numbers? What's happening?
Well,
what do we know about Bscotch ID and pirates?
Right. I guess we have a bunch of kind of interesting numbers moving around on our servers via Bscotch ID. So we can kind of get a sense of what's going on. I think the most important thing to say, though, is that we didn't make Bscotch ID with the intention of it preventing piracy really in any way. Because no matter what you do, if you try to prevent piracy, you're going to end up somehow screwing with honest players. That's just inevitable. See
SimCity 4.
Or Diablo.
Or
Diablo 3.
Or basically any big game from a big publisher. Has some set of stories, especially around launch, where their piracy measures screwed with the average honest player. So that was never the intention of Bscotch ID. But one thing that we did want it to do, though, is sort of filter out pirates. Not because it was actually preventing them from using it, but because they would just be less likely to use it. And you see the same kind of concept in a lot of other games where people have kind of given up on fighting piracy because it's a losing battle. And instead have been trying to provide web-based stuff in their games that requires a login and all that. Because it then gives them some control over stuff and provides a bunch of cool bonus stuff that the player gets. And when you mix all these things together, it just turns out that it's more likely that only honest players will come into it. And a lot of it is because, of course, they provide you with an email address.
Yeah, people who have an illegal copy of a game or who are committing fraud in some way tend to not hand over their personal contact information.
Yeah, they're a little less likely to do it, which is...
They know that they're not doing the right thing.
So one of the best examples of this comes from our free-to-play games, where we can, we have better stats there about who's doing what, because all purchases talk to our server first and all that kind of stuff. And so what we found there is that of our Bscotch ID players, people who've logged into games, only 6% of them try to fraudulently purchase stuff in those games.
6%.
6.
So that's of people who are logged in and try to make a purchase. So
The reason,
6%.
the reason I'm screaming that is because of the number that's coming up.
Yeah, I know. So the number that's coming up, if you look at players who have not logged in, 70% of their purchases are fraudulent.
70%!
Yeah, so the difference is more than almost 12 times. So non-logged in players are 12 times more likely to try to commit a fraudulent purchase.
Exactly. And this is controlling for the fact that non-logged in player or people that are committing or attempting fraud also attempt multiple purchases and that kind of thing. So this is controlling for all that stuff. So it's our data shows that you're 12 times more likely, or you're basically, or the converse of that is you're a 12th as likely to be in Butterscotch ID if you're a pirate. Right.
Mm-hmm. I wonder if people who do this, who like download a program that submits fake purchase data to a server in order to take or like gain access to something they were supposed to have to pay for. I wonder if someone who does this actually considers it to be fraud.
No,
because that's what it is. But
no, I think they don't, and I think it's because of two reasons. One is the numbers are so small, right? Because like especially on mobile, they're like it's like $1 purchase or a $2 purchase or whatever, and so it's kind of like shoplifting a pack of gum, right?
It's not a big deal.
Yeah, it's like it's people like that's bad and you shouldn't do it, but it doesn't feel the same as stealing a car, right? Like. The theft level is clearly very, very different there. So I think that's one part. The other part, of course, is that most of the time that they're using these things are doing it against companies that they perceive as being these massive, all-powerful, evil corporations. And so it's like
we've actually gotten. We've gotten that slam more than a few times.
More than a few times.
Someone will send us an email and be like, "You guys are so goddamn greedy. I'm probably not even gonna be able to talk to a person." Huge tower.
We're like, literally, this email just went to the person who made all the art.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm like, Steve, calm down, man.
Just relax, guy.
Relax.
So, what about actual piracy numbers?
Yeah, so look at piracy numbers and it's important to also know that the way that people steal stuff is very different for free to play games and for games that you have to buy.
Right.
And so, as a consequence, then the ratios are different. And so, Crashlands is really interesting for us because it's our first game that is successful that is pay up front. So we also get to see, and then we have it on mobile and on Steam, so we can see the numbers everywhere. So what we found is, to no one's surprise, the fraction, and I won't get into detail about like where these numbers come from. But I think I'll say up front that they're adjusted for the fact that people sometimes install the same game on multiple devices and all kinds of stuff. So we've adjusted for everything that we can adjust so that we believe these. So the end result is that on Android, the minimum piracy rate probably is 90%.
Minimum.
So this is
so it's at
Crashlands.
least 90.
It's at least 90%. And so this is different than what you'll hear in most other places. So every once in a while people put out their stats, and usually what they put out is a maximum.
It's kind of an overinflated.
Yeah, it's probably inflated a bit to an unknown degree, but it's probably inflated a bit. Ours are probably deflated a bit. So these are a little bit different than what you'll hear in most places. But yeah, so 90% piracy on Android, 20% on iOS.
Which is incredible, if I may be.
Yeah, which is actually really impressive and really surprising. And to me, that one was particularly interesting because when we first did it, it was actually, when we did the raw calculation, it was more like 40%, which was similar to what we've seen elsewhere. Is people reported like 40 to 50% piracy. But once we corrected for multiple installs, then it dropped a lot. So it's only 20%. So that one was kind of surprising. And I think part of it is it turns out that iOS users, I think a lot of them they'll have an iPad and an iPhone. Yeah, own an iPad and an iPhone. Yeah, exactly. So I think there's just a lot of people installing multiple things. And then finally we have PC Mac. We don't know which one's which because we just know that's our Steam version of the game. The piracy rate is 73%.
So I mean, we don't know. I mean, it could be that it's super low on Mac and super high on PC, or vice versa. But we also know that about 10% of our Steam players are Mac players.
Yeah, well, that one to me is also interesting because it's only about 3% of people on Steam are Mac users, but 10% of our player base on Steam. So for some reason we have a threefold enrichment of Mac users.
I don't know why that is.
It's kind of weird.
I mean, I'm wondering, it maybe just be if they're thoroughly embedded in the the Apple ecosystem, that they're more likely to get it because of the cross purchase stuff on iOS, or the cross save, cross platform stuff.
Could
Quite
be
possible, but yeah. So the end result of all this is that Butterscotch ID itself doesn't prevent any piracy. I mean, if you're logged in, well, yeah. So it
prevents fraud.
It prevents fraud, but actually, it's not true because that's already being prevented. If you log into Butterscotch ID, it just now we know who it was that tried to do fraud. But
that's true.
It doesn't add any additional prevention. What it does do is it basically provides the pool of our players who are the most engaged with us, which is awesome because these are the people who went out of their way to sign up for a service that we're providing, give us their email address, they're getting our newsletters, and they're also way more likely to do things like join our forums and listen to our podcasts and all that. So it provides a very enriched population of players who are just much more engaged in our games. So that's the real value of it, is not in preventing piracy, but in just creating a much better social relationship between players and us.
Yeah, and that's something that I think we've always sort of thought about or known, at least on some level, that pirates as players tend to exist in the shadows. You can't form a relationship with them. Like, they don't want to form a relationship with you as a developer. They just want the thing that you made. And then it should just end there. And that's it. Everybody just goes their separate ways. And of course, as a developer, you want to sort of grow a fan base, right? You want to make it so that everybody who bought game 1 buys game 2, plus, you get an additional group of people who have never heard of you before. So you want to constantly be growing that following, and pirates don't tag along with that. So yeah, that's what makes it really difficult, I think. But yeah, Butterscotch ID helps with that side of things. So let's hit the next question, so we do have one from Mia Kitty, but it's another kind of stats question. So we could probably hold off on that one for maybe next week. Mm-hmm. So the next question comes from I Don't Know. That's their Butterscotch ID. With 11 upvotes, what game did you have the most fun developing, including jam games?
I think we've answered a similar variant to this question.
Maybe, but
in the past,
what is it?
For me, I just haven't been involved in as many games. So I have two answers. As a straight up just like making a game thing, it would be, do you even lift?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
And the reason for that for me is just more personal. It's just because that is the only game that I've made in Butterscotch Shenanigans where I was there from the beginning of the game's inception.
True.
Correct.
And it's a tiny game, and it's not... I mean, we may make a version of it that will be...
Well, except for Gerblins.
But that was before Butterscotch, and it was a different thing entirely.
True.
So for me, it was that one for that reason, and the next one would be Crashlands, just because of because the fun part of that to me wasn't even necessarily in the building it, although that was fun, but in the launch part of development, where because Crashlands is a thing that converted our studio from the thing that we were hoping we could manage to turn into our just long-term career to the thing that actually is now.
Yeah.
Because it made it so that we can pay ourselves, which is great.
Which means we can keep making games.
We can keep making games. And this is I mean, the fact, and we keep on like remembering and then forgetting again this fact. But the fact is, like, starting basically 2 weeks ago, that's the first time in the 3 years the studio's existed, and it's all because of Crashlands, that we suddenly have real confidence in a full evidence-based right to be confident about the future of what we're trying to create here.
We'll be around for a while now.
Yeah, so deal with it, guys.
We're in it for the long haul.
Yeah. All right, so next question comes from... Or Sam, did you have a game you wanted to... Or is it Do You Even Lift?
Well, Do You Even Lift is obviously the most hilarious recent one, but I think conceptually Narwhal Online is by far the one I loved developing that one, because that was one of the first ones we actually all three got to work together on. And Adam, I think you were there for the whole.
Yeah, I was there for the whole thing.
You just didn't have any hands in the game itself, because that was basically when Butterscotch ID was made. Was actually over that weekend for the first time. So that one I think was the most fun, just because I think the juice elements in that one, so I watched the video today because we had a chat with a journalist from here in St. Louis, and we showed him the video, And some of the juice stuff, like when you hit an enemy and your horn pings out of your hand and you go sliding backwards and catch. I don't know. It was just, it's a simple game, but I just loved it. And then the overall concept, which is that everybody is feeding into this global war effort. You know, no matter where you're playing from, what color of narwhal you are, you're feeding into this global effort.
But there is a race between the narwhal tribes.
Yeah, of course. And I remember how people, like we had like 400 people playing it when we just put it up, you know, quietly on our site. And they were getting really intense about it. They were, you know, developing sort of slurs for each of the different tribes and stuff. And it was hilarious. It started getting out of control. We're like, we had to shut it down, you know? It's like that stuff is hilarious. So I'm really excited to take that. I mean, Do You Even Lift? Also, both of those I'm really excited to take up a notch in the future.
Take it to the next level.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, for me, I mean, it's definitely Crashlands. Only because, for me, the fun part of game dev is just solving unknowns and sort of tackling new problems. And goddamn, Crashlands was just a never-ending torrential downpour of problems.
And you said was, but you meant is.
Well, yeah, it still is. I mean, there's all kinds of stuff that we're working on for the quality of life patch and stuff. That
everyone's like, hey, how can't we just get pinched to move on that map?
Yeah, I
Says like, oh god,
give me 2 weeks.
Well, to me, the funniest part of the whole thing is people present those ideas like really just straightforward, obvious ones like that, like pinch to move on a map, right? Which as if like it was something that we just didn't think of and so decided not to do.
You're right.
When it's stuff like that, that's like the obvious stuff that everybody universally will agree would make life better. Or people who are like, the map is so slow to load, right? And it's like, we know this. We're well aware of this fact. It's that way because of things that we just couldn't get around during the normal development of the game.
Right.
And the pinch to zoom is one of those things, just like because of the way the map is made, it just turns out for a weird set of reasons that it's super hard to do that. Mm-hmm. I think, Seth, are you actually doing that? Is that part of the plan?
I'm trying to
anyway. Yeah.
It's a lot more complicated than you'd think.
What would you say is the most interesting quality of life thing that you're going to be adding for this patch?
Oh, geez.
Or the few most interesting ones, if there are.
In my opinion, none of them are interesting.
Yeah.
They're just like, every single one of them is just like a small thing that just makes the game, slightly more enjoyable. Right. So
I do want to say, someone asked about having mannequins to get your armor and stuff on.
Yeah.
And we used to have one of those.
We had the hat rack. Was it just the hat rack? Yeah.
It was just the hat rack. It was the only one ever made because when Seth made it, it caused so many problems because it was
that fucking hat rack.
It caused so many
Half of our bug reports came from that hat rack. But I don't know why.
I think I like it. Yeah.
Yeah.
The way the hat rack works is whatever hat you were wearing, you go and slap the hat rack and then it would just take your hat.
Yeah.
And I think I want to do that, but with I do want to have a full mannequin set, but it should just steal all of the stuff that you're equipped with.
You just suddenly
your weapon, your full arm, it's like you slap it and it just steals
sucks
all
your shit off.
Which is going to be the funniest thing. So I hope we get to do that. But
and if you slap it again, it would throw them back on you, presumably.
Yeah, exactly. It's perfect.
That would be pretty amazing.
All right, so we got time for maybe one or two more. So next question comes from Alan MB. Question is, didn't hear anything about the shirts after the holiday period. How did they do? How many were sold? Can we have a butterscotch mob and storm a castle or something?
That escalated quickly, Alan.
It did. But so the shirts we did, just for those who don't know, we have these pretty sweet butterscotch shirts. They're black and they have butterscotch shenanigans.
Wait, hold on.
Front.
Quick poll. How many of the three of us are wearing one right this moment?
I'm wearing one.
I'm wearing mine.
So am I.
Dude, they're so comfortable.
They're really comfortable shirts. So we did we have to do these shirts in a production run. We use a local print shop here in St. Louis called Tiny Little Monster. They do an amazing job, and we are not going to do on-demand stuff because the quality is terrible.
Yeah.
So we're only going to sell quality shirts, but that means we have to do them in batches.
Mm-hmm.
The holiday run did, I think it was 37 shirts or something like that.
Yeah, mid-30s.
But we also, each of us also bought some more of them. So it's probably 30 shirts I think were actually new shirts for new people. And that went pretty well. It doesn't exactly make any, it makes like $100 or something at the end of the day for us. Not exactly a extreme.
It's not
ROI.
a money making operation. It's just we want people to have butterscotch shirts.
So we'll organize a butterscotch mob to storm. I don't know, maybe the White House. We could do that if the election goes weird. We'll just do that. We'll just go take over and call it good. But we'll be doing another t-shirt run, either end of March or April, shortly around the time the creator patch comes out. So there will be more options, and we've been in talks with a really, really good t-shirt designer to make a Crashlands specific t-shirt that should blow your mind. So
minds will be blown.
We'll share more about that as we get more.
Yeah. All right. So, and we'll do last question.
Oh, we never did answer how well the shirts sold.
Yeah, mid-30s.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, but that does mean though that if you're out in the wild in the universe and you see a Butterscotch Shenanigans shirt,
it's a super rare event.
It's a very rare event, and it's pretty likely that it's one of us. First of all,
yeah, it's actually like a 10% chance.
10% chance it's one of us, and especially because I think half of those shirts went out of the United States.
Yeah.
So if you live in the U.S. and you see one of those shirts, there's a pretty damn good chance it's one of us, which is kind of hilarious. But if it isn't one of us, then it's actually going to be somebody who's super active in our forums and listens to our podcast, etc. And so it's going to be somebody you can go say hey to, and you'll probably recognize their username.
They were probably a beta tester of Crashlands.
We've probably answered one of their questions on the podcast.
Or 30.
Or a bunch of them, in the case of Mia Kitty, Olin Riverne, and others. So, yeah.
Yeah, so just keep an eye out we'll probably put that in the newsletter, I would think. Yep. As well as on the blog and all kinds of stuff. All right, so last question comes from Wombat in Combat. Now, I just want to point out.
That is a fucking great name.
I want to point out, though, the in has two N's, which means.
Wombat in.
Maybe he's wombatin in combat, you know?
Wombatin in combat.
It's a verb. He's wombatin.
He's
doing I'm not sure how to interpret it.
I think it's kind of ruined by the extra N a little bit.
Wombatin in combat.
I mean, maybe if you're IGN.
He's bludgeoning things with a wombat. That's what it is. That's how you wombat.
He's wombating.
It's an extra N, combat. 1 out of 5 stars.
Yeah.
Too many N's.
What do you think about adding a quest completed counter in the data menu? This is a Crashlands question.
Yeah.
I would love to fully explore the savannah, etc., if I knew there were more things waiting for me, but I also want to make sure I'm not roaming for nothing when the bog needs me.
That's a good idea, actually.
It is, except of how impossible it is.
Yeah.
Here's why.
It may be impossible, but it's a good idea.
Because quests
are not attached to biome.
Quests are not attached to locations.
Yep.
A quest could come from an NPC who exists in all 3 biomes.
Mm-hmm. We could have a global counter, but we can't have a.
We do have a global counter. Or no, we have. I think.
I don't.
We have a quest completed counter, but not like a quest completed out of total. The other reason for that is that most quests are actually invisible, and they are sort of like transition quests or little events and stuff like that, that just kind of happen automatically. So there is that. But the other thing is, quests can come from NPCs that can be anywhere, and quests could also span multiple biomes. So you could have a quest that requires you to get materials from all 3 biomes, or do something in all 3 biomes.
Yeah, there's also nothing stopping us from having quests that require you to move backwards through biomes, which would then become super confusing because you'd be like, oh, I just have one more left in this biome. I just can't find it. I'm so angry. Hate mail to the devs, etc. When it turns out you have to go to the tundra first to get access to it.
Yeah, so this is one of those things where if you were to, as the wiki starts to take more shape and stuff like that, and people will probably list quests as being in certain biomes, because that's just where you get them. But from a coding standpoint, it's actually oddly difficult to extract that information.
Yeah, computers are extremely dumb, as it turns out, so...
Yeah, so this is, again, like pinch to zoom. It's one of those problems that you look at it and you're like, derp, like obvious, from a human brain perspective, but from a computer's perspective, it's a really complicated problem. Yeah. Okay, so that's all we got for you guys for this week. This has been episode 38 of Coffee with Butterscotch. And again, if you want to get your questions or just vote on other people's questions, you can go to podcast.bscotch.net. and drop us a line in there. We also have a community over at forums.bscotch.net, and we have a growing Crashlands community over at the Crashlands subreddit, which is reddit.com/r/Crashlands. And thank you all for listening, and we'll see you next week.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.